performer building is all about quality to the bone. 4 material selections from the slab to the roof, combining the benefits to deliver a new standard of construction. Allied Concrete is a high performer building certified product. Allied Concrete is highly awarded for its impeccable consistency of quality concrete. When it comes to leading edge innovation, Allied got you covered. From the addition of fly ash, by-waste product from burning coal, to reduce the CO2 footprint and improve the concrete's durability, through to fully insulated slabs and recycled plastic dome systems. Regardless of the ground condition, Allied's got an innovative solution that can improve the performance of your concrete slab foundation.
Good day, and welcome again, everyone. Great to have you for another Building Reboot webinar. And it looks like we're still in the thick of this thing, and there's still uncertainty, and it's all over the show. But one thing that we are seeing is people are still just flat out, and the webinar format is we're getting inundated with webinars, and it's kind of driving a lot of people crazy. And we're getting really good feedback around the content of what we're doing, but also kind of getting the sense from the market and from the industry that we probably don't need quite so much at the moment, given how much everyone else has got on. So we're actually going to be dropping our frequency down to once a month going forward, and just making sure that we are just delivering really high quality content, and maybe not in your ear quite so much. But so I hope that's good. Feel free to feedback either way, but it certainly allows us to a bit more time in between sessions to get on with our main work as well. So today we have Louise Swann again from the building business. So many of you might have seen her in episode 4, I think it was, looking at some broader topics. But today we're going to talking about these updates and changes to the building code. And we're hearing all sorts of different things, good and bad, but it seems very unclear. It seems like a lot of these changes are just kind of been dumped out, and now we're sitting here as an industry trying to work out what on earth they are and what they mean. So Louise is here to help us kind of navigate some of that and watch out for some of the loopholes, but also to look at some of the opportunities that lie within some of these changes. So I'm going to go ahead and get Louise to jump in when you're ready.
I'd have to say it's probably the most boring topic that I'm about to talk on, but welcome everybody. I've divided this presentation in two. The first bit's about the proposed bill with the amendments, and then I also draw to your attention some of those changes to Schedule 1, so that that ostensibly increases the scope of work that can be done without building consent. I'm quite happy for this to be interactive, so please, if you've got some questions, how they do, I'm pretty relaxed about how this flows on. So first of all, we've got, here's the title page. All right, what's that?
Sorry, mate. I'm just going to tell everyone today we've made the comments section public, so everybody can see everybody's questions and comments. So bear that in mind if you're being rude, but also it is a cool way to just engage with what's going on, and you can fire your questions up in that chat section on the right-hand side of the screen, and then we'll just run with that as it goes. Sorry, Louise, I forgot to say that.
It's completely fine. So you can see down the bottom of this slide, that's the URL if you wish to read a copy of the bill, and also to make a submission. And the submissions close on the 10th of July, and I would actually try and encourage many of you to put in a submission. So the kind of context, if you like, of the changes to the bill is that government in their wisdom have decided that there are some systemic problems that are holding the building sector back. It's resulting in low productivity, inefficient practices and processes, yada yada and all of that. And so they're looking at some legislative settings where non-legislative options won't be effective. Now that's just straight out of the bill. So they've got some objectives. They want better build product information so there can be a more informed decision making. They want a new manufacturer certification scheme for manufacturers of modular components. They want to strengthen the product certification scheme code mark. They want to increase the price of fines and increase the length of time to file those charges. And then there are kind of some sundry things, which is changing public notification to allow online notification, using the regulation and widening the scope of the building levy so that they can spend it on some additional stuff. So really, whoops, I'm just going to go back. I'm actually only really going to look at the first 4 points. I'm not going to worry about the sundry. So the first thing is in actual fact looking at the whole area of building products. Government's view is that there are some problems with building products and building methods not being defined, and there's some problems around the minimum requirements for information. So the first thing I want to talk about is the thing about you've got to define what a building product is. Now, you probably won't see it, but what they've got in there is how that they're going to define what a building product is, and it's something that could reasonably expected to be used as a component of a building or as declared a building product by the Governor General. And when you're thinking about it, you've got to think about the purpose, what the supplier's saying. So, you know, actually it's a dog of an idea. We already define building element in the building code. And a building element is anything actually associated with the construction, demolition, or whatever of building work. And if you look at the building code, this term building element is reflected through the code. And building element is linked to the legal definition of building work. So now if we're going to have this new defined term called building product, is a building product a building element? If it's not a building element, then do the provisions of the building code apply to a building product, not a building element? Really, they could have just said a building product is given the same meaning as building element, and then that would have been dead easy. So I think that's a fail. So the next one is defining building method. Not sure what the problem is here. So as you can see, it is the definition is for using one or more products or things as part of building work. Well, from my perspective, anything in law that uses the word things, you've got to be a bit sort of dubious about. I don't know why you don't say a building method is a process for carrying out building work. Pretty straightforward, common sense. I don't know why you need to say building work, because, you know, if it's one or more product, then obviously putting together a truss and frame is a building method. Putting a truss and frame up on site, then you've got the building method for the truss and frame, then you've got the building method for the on-site installation. Sorry, I think that is also a fail. So I'm going to sound very cynical. Sorry about that. Please interrupt me. The next thing are about the building product information requirements that I sort of alluded to in my earlier presentation. And it really defines what sort of information is required, the roles and responsibilities, the enforcement provisions, the fines, the ability for MB to issue a notice to take corrective action. Now, I'm actually really positive about this one, because I'm sure all of us listening will have had frustration with Auckland Council or other councils about what information will they accept, when do they suddenly change their mind, you know, is there a level playing field where they'll accept one product and the identical product because it's a commodity, they won't accept that, and all of that. So I think here we've got a really good opportunity to break this impasse, because at the end of the day, if you comply with the law, it's going to be a bit more of a tough one for Auckland Council or whoever to decide not to rely on that information. So obviously the devil's in the detail, but the other thing I'm really positive about, it also says to those people that are bringing in products or whatever from offshore, you've got to actually have done a bit of due diligence to make sure that your product's fit for purpose. And I'm not saying this because we actually provide passes. Genuinely, I think it's a good thing. So it gets a tick. And then the next thing we move on to is modular component manufacturer certification. So what governments conclude is there's a difficulty in obtaining consent, difficulties in the inspection regime. And so what they're proposing to do is to create a certification scheme that is almost identical to the product certification scheme, except that instead of using the word product certification, they put modular component manufacturer certification. Exactly the same that MB is going to both register and have both register manufacturers and then create a register, and that you've also got to be certified by an accredited body. But my issue about this certification scheme is that whilst in law, the product certification scheme's got to be based on an international standard, ISO 17065, there is no requirement for this certification scheme to have any of that international framework. Furthermore, they talk about that, hold on, have I got it here? They talk about that the certification could be for manufacturing to a building code compliant design, or designing and manufacturing modular building code compliant components. And so what it's saying is that as a manufacturer, if you produce these modular components within your defined scope of practice, those components will be deemed to comply. Here's my issue, is the code decision is made at your consenting stage, not at your building work stage. We already have product certificates code mark that covers the design process. So many of you may know that the designing arm of Golden Homes has code marked their architectural process, and so their plans and specifications. Whoops, what happened there? Those plans and specifications come out with code mark, and many of you will also know about Schindler that has a code mark that covers the design, the building products, the manufacture of the lifts, and then the installation. So what's happened? And so, sorry, Tim. And so from my perspective, I think this is a really silly idea. Offshore manufacture is not building work, so it's treated as a product certification scheme. You know, already you've got options for alternative means of inspection, so you don't have to use the traditional method of inspection. And so if I think of something like Schindler, can they remain with code mark? Do they have to go into this other scheme? How do the two schemes compare? We don't need another scheme. Code mark works more than adequately, so that gets a big cross for me too. So the next thing is we talk about changing to the code mark scheme. And what their concern is that there's a lack of credibility to the scheme. And I agree with them, there is a lack of credibility. But their response is to establish a product certificate register so that product certificates aren't going to be registered until they're on that product certificate register. At the moment, the certificate issue exists the minute the certification body signs it. So here's the interesting thing. If government is going to register product certificates and put on their register, that's like an approval. So in other words, they're moving from keeping a register, which the current law requires, to actually registering a product certificate. And it feels a bit back to the future. Those of us who remember the 1991 Building Act will remember accreditation of building products and processes. So, you know, if you're saying, yes, that certificate can be registered, you're saying that you can rely on it. So I think that we're increasing the liability from government, which is curious, seeing as the whole purpose of third-party certification was to distance that liability. The other thing is, you know, a lot of the code mark certificates out there, they're not clear, they're poorly written. And, you know, since the first certificate was issued in about 2011, MB did have the opportunity for, in actual fact, going back and saying this doesn't make sense, this isn't clear, there are errors. They also had provisions in the Act to actually make product certification bodies perform better, and for whatever reason that never happened. So will registering make any difference? Will that solve the problem? I'm not actually convinced it will. So I'm sorry, that gets across too. So then we go into this registration of product certification bodies. So at the moment, a product certification body is accredited by JASADS. So now what's going to happen, you know, whether it's the Brands' or the SAI Global and the Global Mark, they will also have to be registered by MB. MB's requirements around registration are no different from registration against your 17065 obligations. So again, I'm not actually sure what they think that this is going to do. It gives the provision for MB to audit them annually. Well, they could have done that in any event if they had concern about them. So this just seems another layer of bureaucracy, and I'm not exactly sure what it's going to do. It also tacitly approves the product certification body's functioning. So again, it's a bit of an increase of liability to government. So sorry, that gets across too. And then the last one here is increased penalties and longer time to file charges. I'm not actually sure what the problem is here. But anyway, they're increasing it from 6 months to 1 year to file charges. Obviously, they're including new offences to support the changes to the two schemes, and they're increasing the dollar value for the fines. I'm not in favour of increasing from 6 months to 1 year, because if you look at a lot of the enforcement provisions, they're not really, you know, have you done work without a building consent when you required it, you know, all those sort of things. So I don't actually think that changing it to a year is fair. So I think that it provides the opportunity for surprise charges. If you look at what the Act says currently about how you're supposed to lay charges under the enforcement regimes, it's supposed to be in good faith with, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise. So for me, there's a lack of transparency. And, you know, really, if you've got a complex issue that really is going to take more than 6 months to manage, it's more likely to be something that's going to either be addressed through the Commerce Commission or under tort. So I don't think, you know, these enforcement provisions, they're quick and snappy, on the spot fines, a bit like your speed camera fine, and I don't see why they've got that. So I'm afraid that's another cross for me. So this is really all the changes to the building bill, changes to the Building Act are. There's nothing really else. You know, there's a few rats and mice, but really, apart from saying that building product suppliers have got to have good information, I don't think there's anything particularly there that is going to increase the productivity or increase the performance of buildings or anything like that. Sadly, for me, one of the problems is, in actual fact, the performance of BCAs, building consent authorities, and their application of risk and their lack of risk profiles and training given to their staff about risk, thinking about consequence, likelihood, mitigation factors, and all of that. You know, and there are a lot of other things. So, you know, you might get a council charging, you know, 15 hours of processing time for engineering when they've got a PS1 sitting beside it. The Act is not introducing any ways in which you can challenge that. So, yeah, I think the sleeping giant in the room, or the elephant in the room, is in actual fact the way BCAs carry out their functions, which is frequently not in accordance with the law, but nobody seems to want to address it. Any comments at this stage about what I've said, or is everybody asleep? Or
I think they just like what you've got to say.
Hey?
I think they're just, you know, fascinated with what you've got to say.
Yeah.
Hey, the two things that seem to get media, and my understanding, was the whole building to 30 squares.
I'm going to come to that in a minute. Don't steal my thunder.
Oh, thought you were wrapping up.
Oh,
Right.
I'm glad you're wide awake, Tony. One out of however many is good.
There you go. Right, you're coming to that. And the other thing, just so was the modular building component, an off-site manufacturer.
Yeah.
I thought it was supposed to help with that process, but up to you. I'll get out of your way and let you keep going.
Cool.
Sorry.
Okay, so back to the next part. So we've got the minister standing there saying that we're going to increase the building consent exemptions in. Yes, Chris, I am going to do a submission. Can't help myself. That's just the way I am. So apparently homeowners are going to save money because they won't have to go through the cost of obtaining building consent, and it's going to reduce the number of consents by about 9,000. But like everything in life, it's the devil in the detail. So if you're really boring and you've got Schedule 1 open as I burble on, we first of all look at single-storey detached dwellings. And at the moment, Schedule 1 allows you to put on a 10-square detached building in connection with what do the words actually say? Building work in connection with any detached building. So if there's no detached building on the property, then you can't do that. So they're increasing it from 10 square metres to 30 square metres. But sure, you won't have to pay your building consent fee. But as for 10 square, you can't have a kitchen or bathroom facility. So it's going to be a very big sleep out. The design work's got to either be carried out or reviewed by an engineer. The design and construction could be carried out or supervised by an LBP. Or if you don't want to do either of that, it's got to be a lightweight material and it's got to comply through B1AS1. Now, here's the other kicker. Unless they change the wording, they may apply those obligations around CPENG or LBP or whatever to buildings that are under 10 square metres. So the homeowner-friendly exemptions could in actual fact be more expensive. It might be cheaper just to go with a consent, frankly. The next one they're talking about ground-mounted solar panels. And so if you're in an urban zone, you can put one up for 20 square metres. Between 20 and 24, you've got to have an engineer involved. In rural zones, you can do whatever you like. No size restrictions, no professional required. And we've got another one here. We've got carports increased from 20 square to 40 square. Once again, we've got our LBP or CPENG. And unless they think otherwise, they're going to retrofit it so that at the moment, 20 square metres, up to 20 square metres, you don't need to have the engineer or the LBP. They need to be careful. They may be retrofitting and increasing the obligations. So what's the next thing? Ground floor awnings, once again, increasing it by 10 square metres. The same applies that I've been burbling on about. Ground floor verandas and porches, again, increasing by 10 square metres. Engineers are going to be pretty busy, I reckon. Maybe I should go and do an engineering degree, but I so couldn't pass that. The next thing is you've got single-storey pole sheds and hay barns. Yep, sure, you can do it, but instead of using council, you've got to use an engineer or an LBP. Cheaper, I would say, to do council consent. Then we've got some bridges, but only if it's designed by CPENG. We've got fireplaces and ovens. You've got there, you can see there, height 2.5, cooking space 1 square metre. You've got water storage bladders up to 200,000 litres, but only for firefighting and irrigation. So that's clearly not part of your potable water system. And you've got small pipes supporting structures, but only water and on private land. And again, these things, there is the requirement that you can demonstrate all aspects of it comply with the building code. So that feeds in pretty well to the changes around product suppliers and providing information. And so really, if you're one of these people importing the timber cabins, then you would want to be updressed, meeting what's coming in around the Building Act with information, meeting and having a design reviewed by the engineer or something like that, because, you know, I would hope the Commerce Commission is going to at some stage start getting a bit interested in people that are selling all these bloomin' sheds as though they can be used for all these purposes, and yet many of them don't have any means of any foundations or anything like that. Some do. So we've got a few clients that we're working very hard with. So I guess the thing is, this is the end of my presentation, 25 minutes, that's pretty quick. Honestly, if I've got to think about how do I feel about the changes to Schedule 1 or the changes to the Building Act, and the only way I can look at it, it feels like the Emperor's New Clothes. That's me.
I'll just, if anyone's got any questions, fire them up there now, and we'll just give you a couple of minutes.
For you to disagree with me.
Look, it sounds like a whole lot of stuff that really doesn't achieve much.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's this fellow called Malcolm Sparrow who started life as a London bobby, but must be pretty clever because he's now a Harvard professor, and he's written this book called The Regulatory Craft, which is really boring. But one thing he says is you've got to actually identify the problem and fix it. And in my view, they might have identified some symptoms, but they haven't identified the problem. So in actual fact, for modular construction, the symptoms might be difficulty in getting the consent, difficulty in getting inspections, but that's not the problem. So for instance, for module, we've now got the ridiculous thing where people sometimes have to apply for 2 consents, a consent for where the building is manufactured, and then a consent for its location on land. Well, in actual fact, my reading of the law is that's actually outside the law, because building work is construction or demolition, it's swinging a hammer in connection with a site, and the consent has got to be issued by the organisation that is responsible for that region. And so, 2 consents. The problem is a symptom. The problem is actually council and MB's inability to read the Building Act.
There's a question there about 30 square metres being limited to single story.
Yeah.
It is single.
Yeah, only 1 story, and no toilet, no kitchen facilities.
So what about things like these tiny homes with composting toilets and a mezzanine bed? Where does that sit? Woodshed.
You could have a very big woodshed. No, you would need consent. I mean, the whole thing about whether a tiny house is a building or not, to me, is missing the point, because, irrespective of whether it's a vehicle, a caravan, or a building, you still want it to meet the performance requirements of the building code. If we think the quality of what the interior environment is important, and if you're going to have a composting toilet, that's fine, but you do need to think about, well, if you're having a composting toilet that's fixed in the ground, you need a consent for that. But if you're going to have a portable one that's only intended for use in a self-contained camper van or whatever, you do need to think about how you're going to dispose of it. And it's actually about, I kind of felt sorry for the neighbours of the guy down in the South Island that took it to court and won and all of that jazz. Because frankly, the guy looked thoroughly thoughtless. He'd parked his tiny home right on the boundary, which was pretty, thoughtless for his neighbour. And he had a chemical toilet. Well, God knows where he emptied that. And he got his water from a hose. Sure, maybe he didn't need a building consent, but he certainly needed to comply with the district plan. And I doubt they thought about that. So I get a bit irritated about tiny home builders, because there's good part about the Building Act, which actually at least makes you think about other people. And,
Cool.
Thank you, Dean.
I think everyone's happy. I can't see too many questions firing up. So unless you've got anything else to add, we'll fire Cameron's chat up.
Just one word is, so just before, if anybody wants to do a collective submission, by all means email me, and I'm Louise at thebuildingbusiness.co.nz. And look, I'm happy to do a combined one. Kevin and I have already thought that we are going to actually also go down and do an oral submission because, we think it's important that the politicians hear it without it being filtered by 30 square metres. Is there a building height? Yes, there will be. It will be a height of up to 3.5 metres above the floor level.
And that could be all the way around, not necessarily the peak of the apex roof.
How do they measure it? It'll be exactly the same, I assume, as what is currently in Schedule 1. I'm just reading that off.
It's relatively high.
3.5 metres above floor level. It depends whether or not you measure that to the underside of the ceiling or the highest point of the roof. Highest point of the roof, you reckon, or the highest? Well, building height isn't. Sorry, I'm just having an argument with Kevin here.
No, the only reason I say that is because I want to.
Oh, okay. The devil.
Because I was, planning issues coming.
Oh, yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, you've still got to work out your planning issues for your unconsented, largely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Shall I turn off everything now?
Well, you're right. Yeah, hey, well, I'd say on behalf of all of us, thank you, and wish you both all the best down at Parliament. And if you need anything, I do encourage everyone to pop Louise an email with any of their questions, concerns, feedback, or experiences that you're having out there, because Louise is a good person to have in there batting for us as an industry, I think. Yeah. Awesome.
Hey, thanks very much, guys. Talk soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Louise. See ya. And all right, so I'm just going to fire up Cameron's chat, which we had just a moment ago. Yeah.
Yeah, hi all. Just a quick economic update in regard to how I'm seeing things out there. We just got the Q1 GDP figures for New Zealand, which in all honesty is a hell of a long time ago, but they're getting a fair bit of attention today. Look, for the record, the economy shrank 1.6% in the quarter, which is the biggest decline in quarterly GDP we've seen since 1991. Now, to put that in perspective, the New Zealand economy was only effectively shut down for 6 days during that quarter. So that gives you a bit of an idea about what the potential economic hit could be in Q2, where we spent basically all of April at level 4, and then we've moved down to 3, 2, and we're now trading at a 1. Look, technically, we're looking in the rearview mirror, but if you actually look at what we're seeing from week to week or day to day at the moment, it's hard to believe, but the New Zealand economy is actually coming out of recession. But what we're going to see within the commentary at the moment is talk about being in a recession. Now, we're seeing a lot of improvement across a whole lot of high frequency data. If you look at foot traffic, if you look at freight volumes, traffic volumes, people getting out on the road, paymark spending data. A little bit of that spending looks to be a little bit of euphoria, relief, before a little bit of reality sort of kicks in. But we have technically turned the corner, although for a lot of firms, there's an awful long way to go before we get the level of activity anywhere back to where you consider somewhat more normal. And I still am in the camp that returning to a more normal level of activity, i.e. the 2019 sales line, I still think that's a 2022 story as opposed to anything that's going to take place in the next 12 months. We are making incremental progress, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Look, point 2, just a bit of reality check in regard to what we've seen obviously in the past 48 hours in regard to this damn thing coming back in. To me, we just need to apply a little bit of common sense here. It was always going to come back in. And New Zealand, yes, we've got geographic advantage with this nice little couple of islands down in the South Pacific. But to completely exterminate this thing, it's a little bit like having a society with no crime, no law breakers. Everybody obeys the rule. Is that economic reality? The answer is no. We are always going to see a portion of society that is not law-abiding and does not play by the rules. So expect to see a little bit more of this sort of stuff. To be fair, the government's approach, the system they built up, well, they didn't really have a system, to be perfectly honest. So it's pretty easy for the rule breakers to get out there and it's come back in. And to me, it's a bit of a reminder that the scenario that I'm starting to think about at the moment, it's not just because of what's happened in New Zealand. I still think technically we're in a lot better shape than an awful lot of other countries around the globe. We're still seeing this knocking on the door, rising cases around the globe. If you look at certain states in America, Arizona, these sort of places, Brazil, India, obviously it's come back into Beijing. I think they're a little bit light on the numbers that are getting reported there. So what does that mean, bigger picture for New Zealand? Yes, technically we've turned the corner in regard to growth, though in a level sense we're well down on where we would like to be. But I'm starting to think a lot more about what's called a W-shaped cycle. And I think that'll be the 2021 story, because what we've seen over the past couple of months is that it's by and large been a domestic downturn story as we've sort of shut up shop. The global story stripping out tourism, if you look at exports of goods, has actually been pretty damn good. And I'm just not convinced that story is going to hold up in 2021 as we start to see the global consumer, and I'm talking about the American consumer here, I think it's going to buckle, and they're going to buckle pretty severely. Point three, just continue to see an awful lot of government money going out the door. To be fair, I think a fair bit of it's still got a little bit of confetti style approach about it, but they're still spending willy-nilly. A lot more green style projects being favoured over the grey. I'm not convinced we're going to get a productivity enhancement out of the green stuff. I'd like to see a lot more grey, but there's still a lot of money that's going out the door. Just a couple of things to be aware of. Look, plaudits to the government for the money that they've stumped up for paying firms to have apprentices. I think that's a real shot in the arm. That's a real encouraging step. My fear was that some organisations were going to take an awful lot of that money and to get drip fed out into the business sector. The fact that it's going directly into the hands of the business sector, I think is really welcome in regard to getting a lot more leverage or a lot better execution in regard to making sure we see that pipeline of apprentices built around the corner. The other thing that's caught my attention at the moment is that while the government is spending an awful lot, and there's still a fair bit to go, starting to see more and more stories in regard to local government projects that are being stalled or effectively substituted with central government ones. So yes, the central government is spending pretty big, but what we're seeing on the other side is because local government authorities have really got their back up against the wall in regard to incomes down and debt's pretty high, is that they're readdressing their 10-year plan, and a lot of projects that they thought they were going to do, they're basically carving up or they're parking, and they're seeking central government money as a substitute for that. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the government stimulus that is coming into the pipeline is not going to be as large as what we perhaps originally thought. Point four, just quickly, I normally don't like to talk about social issues, but I don't think we could ignore this one. What's caught my attention has been the Black Lives Matter. Look, without entering into debate on racism, which I think is a problem, to me, these marches around the globe are not just about racism. I think they're telling us there's a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-year story here where the gap between the haves and the have-nots has just become too wide. We see it in New Zealand. If you look at Maori unemployment versus European unemployment within the social housing stats in regard to home ownership and this sort of stuff. So I think we're starting to see a fair bit of blowback around the globe, and we're seeing that locally. Law and order is being tested, and some of this sort of stuff could turn a little bit nasty. You know, I think about it, if you're an American investor, they're looking at, you know, putting a retail shop on Main Street of any main American city at the moment, you'd be a pretty brave person to be taking that lease. You know, because odds are there could be something moving down the street sometime, and all of a sudden you'll fit out of your shop. Well, you've got a few problems there on the other side. Our final point observation I just thought I'd talk about is Wall Street versus Main Street. What we've seen around the globe in the past month or 2 months has been one hell of a recovery across Wall Street or equities, which there's various theories in regard to what's going on. Some people put it down to the fact, well, equities are forward-looking, so the fact that the global economy technically is looking less worse, or we're starting to turn the corner. There's reasons for equities to go back up. Liquidity is abundant, and of course what we've also seen is central banks are out there throwing the kitchen sink for this thing, and the US Federal Reserve, which is the world's most biggest, powerful central bank around the globe, came out the other night, and they basically announced their, in fact, didn't just announce, they started to do it. They're buying corporate debt. They're providing a backstop to make sure that firms have got access to liquidity. Now, glass half full. This is about central banks deploying their armory, making sure that the financial plumbing is working. Glass half empty. When you start seeing central banks implicitly underpinning asset values, what does that do? It drives a bigger wedge between the haves and the have-nots. The big winners here have been Wall Street, the owners of capital. If you look at Main Street, the unemployment rate, or job seeker benefit numbers, or what we're starting to see in regard to demand for food parcels, you've got a massive disconnect. Now, to be fair, part of this disconnect reflects, one's forward-looking, whereas unemployment, jobs tend to be a bit of a lagging indicator. But I think central banks have got to be really careful at the moment, because the more they interfere in the market, the more they interfere with what's called the process of price discovery. If you're an investor out there at the moment, you're actually not quite sure what you're buying. Is it a quality asset or not, or is it just something that's been propped up artificially by this huge wad of central bank money? And if I go back and have a look at what I talked about at theme 4 in regard to Black Lives Matter, and starting to think about the social side of the ledger, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, that gap between Wall Street and Main Street at the moment, I'm just starting to find a little bit troubling in regard to where we're going to start to see the social side of the ledger pretty heavily overlap with the other side with the economic side of the ledger. So that's all from me. Catch up with you next time.
The Roofing Store Steel Roofing.
Guys, thanks again for attending, and we really appreciate it. It's quite a loyal following and a good group of you that are coming along every week, and we really appreciate that. We had the ad at the start and the ad just now, and we'll finish off with one. But I do say, if you want to come and see us at the showroom and talk a bit more about some of these products, or see and touch and feel them a bit more, jump on our website, click the visit the showroom button there, and or just get in touch with us somehow, because we'd love to be in touch and talking about that. Obviously, that's our main job. So thanks for having us. Thanks for being with us. And look, just keep an eye out. We will be looking probably 1 month out now for the next one. But we will make sure that it is well worth your time showing up to. So appreciate it, guys, and hang in there.
USG Boral Plasterboard is a high-performer building certified product because of the 115 years of innovation that have made it the global award-winning plasterboard it is today. USG know a thing or two about plasterboard. In fact, they invented the stuff in 1916 and haven't stopped improving it since. Award-winning innovations like sheetrock, a lightweight board with sag-defying strength, or multi-stop 4 that reduces the amount of board types on site as it really does it all. Fire, moisture, sound, impact and bracing. And Fibrock Aquatub. It's a seriously strong board made with 95% recycled content. With no facing paper, you get beautifully smooth walls that are impact resistant. Plus, it can hold up to 48 kg tiles per square metre. It's easy to see why USG Boral are world leaders in plasterboard products and systems. Check them out at highperformer.co.nz for your next project.